silence reigned before the first breath of thought. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of concealed knowing, the kind that hides in the folds of light before it touches form. From this silence, not born but unveiled, came a boy in the land where olive trees whispered ancient lullabies to the Andalusian skies. His name was not simply Ibn Arabi, it was a doorway. He was not swaddled in cloth, but in questions. His eyes, barely opened, mirrored an ocean that had not yet decided its shorelines. The midwife who witnessed his birth said she saw his breath write calligraphy into the air, a symbol that shimmered, then vanished like dew from untouched parchment. Even as a child, Ibn Arabi did not speak like others. He did not speak to communicate. He spoke to remember. He once turned to his mother, placing his hand gently on her chest, and said, "Your heart holds more than the rhythm of life. It holds what life is trying to remember." He wandered gardens not to pick flowers, but to hear what the bees were trying to translate. In the darkness of night, he would lay beneath the sky and whisper to the stars, not for answers, but to remind them of their origins. He said the stars were sighs exhaled by the divine, trapped in flame and geometry. He believed dreams were not escapes, but the original reality we had once known before being wrapped in flesh. One day, while sitting beside a fountain shaped like an open palm, he heard the water speak, not in words, but in Zarafat, a language only known by matter before it agreed to be solid. The water showed him visions, of a woman made of moonlight and silence, of a tower with no entrance, of a mirror that did not reflect but revealed. That night he did not sleep. Instead, he watched the flame of an oil lamp and saw within it an alphabet unknown to man. Letters of breath, syllables of silence. When dawn finally arrived, it did not break, it bowed. As he grew, he met those who called themselves scholars, philosophers, wanderers. But none of them truly traveled. They walked paths of stone. Ibn Arabi walked paths of meaning. His journey was vertical, not horizontal. He dove into the depth of a single word and emerged in entire universes. He met a man named Bahjat, who had never spoken a lie, but had also never spoken the truth. Bahjat taught him that some truths die the moment they are spoken. So Ibn Arabi learned to carve truths into silence. He wrote books that could only be read in mirrors under the full moon. He composed verses that only revealed their meaning when cried over. His most famous text, they say, was never written. It existed only in the space between two heartbeats. It was called the echo of what was before the name. In Damascus he met a boy who asked, "What is existence?" Ibn Arabi smiled and said, "Existence is Allah breathing in a language only He understands, and we are the reverberations of that sacred breath." He often spoke of a city made of vowels, suspended in light, visited only by those who have never asked why. He described a tree that bore fruits shaped like ears, not to hear sounds, but to remember forgotten vibrations of the divine decree. People would accuse him of madness. Some said he was a heretic, others a saint. But he said nothing. He simply walked, barefoot, through deserts of logic and oceans of metaphor. In his final days he became thin, almost translucent, not from illness but from transcendence. He once said, "I am becoming less so that I may be more." The last person who saw him swore Ibn Arabi had no shadow. "He has stepped too far into meaning," they said. "Even light does not know how to follow." One morning they found his room empty. On the bed was not a body, but a single word, kun. It shimmered for a moment, then vanished. And somewhere, far beyond time, the secret of existence smiled. For Ibn Arabi had not died. He had returned to the silence from which he had once emerged. This time, not as a question, but as the answer the universe had always been waiting to remember. But that was not the end. In a realm unbound by direction or time, a chamber of light opened like an eyelid, revealing a realm made of breath and meaning. Here, Ibn Arabi stood once more, not in flesh, but in essence. He stood beneath a sky that spoke in echoes and walked upon a ground made entirely of unasked questions. He came upon a creature, neither angel nor jinn, with wings made of parchment and eyes that turned with every verse recited. It bowed and said, "You have crossed into the Wujud al-Hakiki, the field of real being. Few know this place. Fewer still return." "I do not return," Ibn Arabi said. "I unfold." The creature wept tears of ink and led him to a vast library, infinite in all directions, where books wrote themselves in response to one's inner stillness. There he found a manuscript that hummed his name. Upon touching it, he remembered, not knowledge, but pre-knowledge, that which came before awareness. He was shown a city suspended between two ayahs, where the minarets chanted prayers that bent reality, and rivers flowed with forgotten supplications. He was greeted by shadows of prophets, whose faces shimmered with metaphors. He spoke to Khidr, the green one, who asked him, "What is it you seek, O bearer of paradox?" And Ibn Arabi replied, "Not what, but who." Khidr smiled and gave him a seed. "Plant this not in soil, but in silence. Water it with dhikr, and you shall reap the secret that even angels forgot." Days passed, or perhaps centuries. In that realm, time bent like reed in wind. Ibn Arabi sat beneath a tree that grew from his own breath and watched universes hatch from its leaves. The seed Khidr had given was unlike anything of the earthly realm. It pulsed with silence and throbbed with forgotten names of Allah. Ibn Arabi cradled it in his palm, and within it he heard the hum of pre-creation, a lullaby sung to atoms before they chose form. He placed the seed into a hollow woven from breath and remembrance, and with every utterance of Yahoo, it began to sprout, not upward, but inward. This tree did not grow towards the sky. It grew toward essence. It split reality not like a sword, but like a realization. Its branches were not wood, but verses. Its fruits were spheres of meaning, and each, when opened, echoed a name of God that had not yet been known to the world. As the tree deepened into him, so did visions. He saw a caravan moving without camels, without footsteps, led by a guide who had no face. "Where are you going?" Ibn Arabi asked. The guide replied, "We are returning to the place we never left." He met souls shaped like prayers, luminous and trembling with longing. They danced not to music, but to intention. One came to him and said, "You are not reading the universe, you are being read by it." He passed through a gate made of utterance and found himself in a city called Ma'ani, where the buildings breathed and the streets rearranged themselves according to one's sincerity. In Ma'ani, truth was not told, it was tasted. There he met a woman cloaked in verses, whose presence felt like the pre-dawn pause between two ayahs. She called herself Sakina, not a name, but a state, the tranquil presence. She asked him, "What is the edge of knowing?" And he replied, "The beginning of unknowing." Together they sat by a stream made of time, where each drop was a moment forgotten by the world. They drank from it, and in that instant, Ibn Arabi remembered every breath he had ever taken and why. He wept, not from sorrow or joy, but from recognition. Later, in the temple of infinite angles, he encountered mirrors that did not show reflections, but possibilities. One mirror showed him as a child who never spoke, another as a star collapsing into itself, yet another as a whisper in the divine breath. He realized then he was not one thing, but all the questions God had asked himself before saying, "Be." That night the sky unfolded like parchment, and a pen made of light began to write across it. The words were not in Arabic, nor Hebrew, nor Sanskrit, but in Ishrat, gestures of the soul. They told him, "You are the metaphor through which I remember myself." In this second journey, Ibn Arabi did not seek, he dissolved. He became the space between letters, the hush between divine names, the ink that did not stain, but awakened. He reached a place called Dar al-Haq al-Mutlaq, the abode of absolute truth. Here there was no time, no duality, only the radiant hush of certainty, and within it a door with no frame, labeled only, "Enter not with eyes, enter with absence." He passed through. Through the door labeled "Enter not with eyes, enter with absence," Ibn Arabi stepped not into a place, but into a state, a place where thoughts had no beginning, only endless reverberations, a world where the very act of entering erased the concept of departure. In this timeless space, Ibn Arabi found no walls, no edges, no boundaries. There was only light and the absence of light. There was only sound and the absence of sound. It was a space where everything whispered its essence, and yet no words were spoken. He stood in the center of this space, his heart a quiet flame, waiting, and then he heard a voice, not from without, but from within the folds of his own consciousness. It was a voice that had no sound, but it was louder than any thunder. "Who are you, Ibn Arabi?" the voice asked. His answer came not from his lips, but from the depths of his being. "I am the question that God has asked himself, the breath that stirs the heart of existence." The voice fell silent. The space pulsed, and then, from the silence, a figure emerged, not a figure of flesh, but of light. It was both distant and near, both strange and familiar. It spoke, and its words were not heard by the ears, but understood by the soul. "You are what you have always sought, Ibn Arabi. You are the one who knows that there is no separation between the lover and the beloved, the seeker and the sought." The figure's form shimmered and faded, and Ibn Arabi felt himself drawn to a distant horizon. Not a physical horizon, but a metaphysical one. A place where all the questions of existence met. There he saw an endless ocean, its waters made of questions and answers intertwined. As he approached the shore, the ocean whispered, "You will never find the shore you seek, for the shore is only the reflection of your own soul." He understood then that he was not meant to find anything outside of himself, but to dissolve the very search itself. In this place of profound realization, Ibn Arabi was visited by a form of his own consciousness, a version of himself who had long ago stepped out of time and space. This version of himself, radiating wisdom and understanding, gazed into his eyes and said, "You have crossed the threshold, Ibn Arabi. You are no longer separate from what you seek. Now, you are the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. But remember, there is no end to this journey, only an unfolding." Ibn Arabi felt his being dissolve once again, not into nothingness, but into everything. The boundaries of self, the ego, the illusions of separation melted away, leaving only the radiant unity of existence. He realized that the I he had always identified with was nothing more than a veil. Beneath it lay the infinite, and in the infinite there was no distinction between the known and the unknown. There was only presence. And so he sat in the infinite light, no longer a traveler, no longer a seeker, just the silent witness to the unfolding of existence itself.